I want to invite the young people for our children's message. So would you guys come on up here to the front and sit in the front row so that I can share with you guys? Awesome. I want to begin with kind of a review with you guys. We started a new series of messages in church here, and it's on the book of Habakkuk. Can we squeeze together a little bit? All right. I want to set one right here. Reagan, can maybe scoot a little bit? How about right here, bud? That's your spot there. Cool. She's a good girl. You can trust her. Okay. Good. So we started a new series, and I wanted to share with you. Last week I shared about you that this guy that we're looking at in our message series, his name is Habakkuk, and I told you that he was a minor prophet. And in the Bible, we have what we call major prophets, and we also have minor prophets. So here's your test. Okay, I'm giving you a quick test. Do you remember what's the difference between a major prophet and a minor prophet? Do you guys remember?
One of them has a lot of reading, a lot of words, and the other one has only a few words.
Very good. That's with A+. A+. Moms and dads, did you hear that? The difference between a major prophet and a minor prophet. A major prophet, it has nothing to do with their character or their spirituality or anything like that. A major prophet, they've just written a lot, okay? So when you hear about the major prophets in the Bible, they've just written a lot of stuff, like, the book of Isaiah. Isaiah has 66 chapters. We're looking at the book of Habakkuk. It's a small book in comparison. It's a minor book. Habakkuk has only 3 chapters, okay? So good job, Lucy. Everybody, you remember that? Maybe I'll throw that quiz at you again. Did you know the answer? Oh, good job. Good job. Now, for today's lesson, we're still talking about Habakkuk. Remember, he is a major prophet, right? No. He is a minor prophet because he hasn't written too much, just a little bit, right? Well, I want to talk to you about prophets, okay? Now, here's what prophets do. Prophets get a revelation from God, and then they share that revelation with the people, okay? For example, with Habakkuk, God said, Habakkuk, I am going to bring a nation to judge Israel. And I want you to tell people about that. And so Habakkuk says, hey, Israel, be ready. Judah, be ready, because there is an army that's coming, and they're going to take you as prisoners and take you to a different place, a different land. And guess what happened? That very word came true. And so that's what I want you to know about prophets, because you're going to hear about prophets not only in this church, but wherever you go, somebody will be talking about a prophet. And here's something I want you to remember regarding a prophet. A true prophet, okay? That's a key word there, true. A true prophet, what he says comes true, okay? So if somebody says, you know what, I'm a prophet, how do you tell if he is truly a prophet? You tell by whether or not his words come true, okay? So that's how you tell a prophet. If somebody says, I have the gift of prophecy and I can tell you what's going to happen in the future, I would tell you guys to be kind of cautious and say, yeah, really? Because what a prophet says comes true. But if it doesn't come true, then guess what kind of a prophet he is. Yeah, he's a fake. Okay? He's a liar. Exactly. You guys got the point. Well, that's right. Well, there is a basket there. Oh, there's some candy over there as you leave. And there is children's church today. So you get to be with Perry. All right, so go to children's church. Oh, okay. It's with Sky. Sorry. Well, one of the things I have done in the past, and you guys are going to, as soon as I say this, you're going to go, oh, yeah, that's right. I usually have used the month of January as Ole and Lena month. Okay? And here we are. This is the second week in January, and I have not, third week? We're in the third week, and we haven't talked about Ole and Lena at all. You know what? I totally, I don't, for whatever reason, I totally forgot about that I usually do that. And so my only excuse is I am Norwegian. What's your excuse, right? So anyhow, let me share with you an Ole and Lena joke. And for those of you who are wondering, what is this Ole and Lena joke? Here's how you handle it. Don't think too hard about it, okay? Okay, these are just some Scandinavians who are very simple, okay? And today I want to share with you about Ole and Sven. Of course, I usually talk about Ole and his wife Lena, but today we're talking about Ole and Sven. And Sven is a relative of Ole, and they do things together. So anyhow, the joke goes like this. Sven was just pulling his boat up on the shore when Ole wandered up to Sven. And Ole says to Sven, "Hey Sven, what are you doing?" And Sven says, "Well, I've been fishing, Ole. What do you think I've been doing?" And then Ole says, "Well, did you catch anything?" And Sven shakes his head and says, yes, of course I caught something. I always catch fishes when I go," he says. Ole says, "Well, if I guess how many fish you caught, will you give me one of them?" Sven says, "Ole, if you can guess how many fish I caught, I'll give you both of them." So, Ole says, "Okay, you'll give me both of them?" Sven says, "Yes, I will." And Ole says, "Okay, I guess 3. And Sven laughs, "Oh, Ole, that ain't bad for a guess. You missed it by 2. Well, we are in a series of messages we began last week in the book of Habakkuk, a minor prophet. He hasn't written a lot, therefore he is a minor prophet. But the reason we're in the book of Habakkuk is because what Habakkuk has said, what he has written, seems to address right where we are at as a country, as a nation. He seems to encapsulate those things that we are struggling and wrestling with. For instance, let me just read the first few verses of Habakkuk. And here's how Habakkuk begins. And let me ask you, after I read that, if that does not apply to us. Okay? And here's what he says. This is the oracle of Habakkuk, and he says to God, he's complaining, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Justice does not prevail because it's been paralyzed by the wicked." Seems to be talking about today, doesn't it? It seems to, sure does. And so here in chapter 1, what Habakkuk, not only does he complain to God, he has a question for God. And this question is this, God, why are you allowing all this wickedness to take place? God, it seems like you've been pretty silent here. There's some terrible things that are going on. And I'm wondering why you have not responded to the situation. So that's his question. Now, when we come to chapter 2, Habakkuk has another question. And his question is this, okay, God, will they get away then with their injustice? Let me explain a little bit more. See, both these questions of Habakkuk are questions that we're asking too. And And so Habakkuk is asking, first of all, are you going to do anything about all this violence and this conflict and deception that exists in this world? Are you going to do anything? And at this time, the kingdom of Judah, to whom Habakkuk is prophesying, Judah is in a bad way. They are morally corrupt. They are spiritually corrupt. And Habakkuk sees this, and it troubles his heart. He doesn't like what he sees that is going on, and so he's asking God, God, are you going to do anything about it? Well, God responded to his first question. And he said to Habakkuk, Habakkuk, you will be amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. So here's how God amazed Habakkuk. What God did is God raised up a wicked nation to deliver judgment on Judah. In other words, God chose to use wickedness to deal with wickedness. God raised up an evil nation to deal with the evilness that existed in Judah. And when Habakkuk heard this, I mean, he was amazed. He was surprised. It's like God, a good God, a God who is gracious, a God who is just and merciful. How in the world, God, can you use something bad? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. At least that's what Habakkuk was wrestling with. Well, after the shock wears off, Habakkuk has this second question. That's the one that we'll focus on this morning. And the question is this. Okay, you're going to raise up the Babylonians, this evil empire, this ruthless people, to bring judgment on Israel, Judah. Now he wants to know, his question is this, will you deal with this wicked nation when it's all done? Habakkuk gets it. God, you're going to raise up this wicked, deceitful nation to bring judgment. Okay. When that does happen, will you deal with that wicked nation, or will they get off scot-free? That's his question. Now, these are the very same questions that we're asking as well. I mean, when we live in our particular setting, in our culture, will it be political or religious? We've all experienced, we've all sensed the frustration of conflict and wickedness and deception and injustice. I mean, we're there. We've wrestled with it. We've sensed it. And we've asked it, right? We've asked it, God, is this going to continue? I mean, are you going to do anything? Yes, God's going to do something. Well, anyhow, in Habakkuk's situation, he raised up a wicked nation. And now he wants to know, okay, you're going to use this nation. Will this nation experience punishment for their behavior, or will they get away with it? And that's what we're wondering too. Will people get away with it? We see it. We're frustrated. We're in emotional turmoil, and we're wondering, are they going to get away with it? That's what we were asking God. Well, let's go to our passage this morning. What we'll do is we'll read through chapter 2. So there's 20 verses here. And again, just keep in mind, the question is, okay, Habakkuk says, God, will the Babylonians get away with it? So let's go to chapter 2 of Habakkuk and read through what not only Habakkuk is asking, but God's response. Beginning in verse 1. He says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me. And this, of course, is Habakkuk talking. And he says, I'll wait to see what answer I am to give to this complaint. And so here's God's answer. And then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end, and it will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, he is puffed up. And here God is talking about the Babylonian people, he says, and that empire. He says, see, the Babylonians, they're puffed up. His desires are not upright. But the righteous, they will live by his faith. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death, he is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations, and he takes captives of all the peoples. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion? How long must this go on? Will not your debtors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their victim. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed man's blood, and you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his realm by unjust gain and sets his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house and forfeiting your own life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by crime. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskins until they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done in Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of the animals will terrify you. For you have shed man's blood, and you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Of what value is an idol since a man has carved it, or an image that teaches lies? For he who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him, for he says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So Habakkuk here is concerned about the Babylonians. And his question is, okay, God, will the Babylonians get away with it? Will they go scot-free after you have used them? God's answer to Habakkuk is this: no. In God's economy, justice always prevails. Babylon will not get away with it. In fact, five times God says, woe concerning the Babylonian Empire. Now that word woe, that three-letter word woe, signifies impending doom, condemnation, or the wrath of God. Let me just reiterate that. That word woe, here in this context, here in Habakkuk, when we read woe, when we hear that, what we're hearing is this, impending doom, condemnation, and the wrath of God. And as I said, 5 times he speaks of that. Let's look at those 5 woes, okay? In verse 6, God brings condemnation to Babylon for extortion. Verse 5 says this: woe, or condemnation to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. Will Babylon get away with it? The answer is no. In verse 9, we have our second woe. God's wrath will be unleashed on their arrogance. Okay? Verse 9. Okay? God's wrath to him. Woe to him who builds his realm by unjust gain to set his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. Okay, to set his nest on high, speaking of being above everyone else and looking down upon them, okay? Their pride, their arrogance. In verse 12, impending doom is coming for their bloodshed. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by crime. In verse 15, we have another woe, speaking of the condemnation that is coming for their immorality. Verse 15, God's wrath and condemnation comes to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that they can gaze on their naked bodies. Immorality. That's who Babylon is. Verse 19, God's wrath is unleashed for their idolatry. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. Here the Babylonians are bowing down to worthless images. And because of that, God is bringing judgment. So yes, Babylon will face judgment. They will not get away with their evilness. Even though God has chosen in his realm and his plan for whatever reason, he has chosen to use the wickedness of Babylon to bring judgment on Judah, a country that is also bankrupt morally and spiritually. But the question that we're wrestling with is this: will the enemy get away with their evil deeds? Will they go scot-free? And that question is asked because we all have a sense of justice, don't we? We do not like cheaters. We don't like those who call good bad and bad good. That just rubs us the wrong way. And we're all experiencing, I think, we're all sensing it and feeling it in our world. And so we are asking that question, will they get away with it? Will they get away with it? Here's what we've learned in verse 3. Look at verse 3 with me there of chapter 2. As we answer that question, will they get away with it? Will they go scot-free? Well, of course, the answer is no. But look at verse 3 in Habakkuk there. And verse 3 says this: for the revelation awaits an appointed time. And of course, this is talking about the prophecy, that revelation that God is giving to Habakkuk to share with Judah. And he says, that revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of an end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Again, in God's economy, in the way that he does his things, evilness, injustice, deception, all of the above, will be dealt with by the Most High. People will not get away with it. Judgment is coming. Now, when we speak of this judgment, this retribution, if you will, here's 3 things that I want to share with you to keep in mind regarding God's retribution. The question is, okay, God, will these people get away with it? Will they go scot-free? Well, the answer is no. God's going to deal with it. But here's what we need to understand regarding God's retribution, his condemnation of evil. And there's 3 things I want to share with you from verse 3. Number 1, God's retribution will happen. That's in verse 3 there. God says, it will not prove false. In other words, God says, I'm just not flapping my gums here, okay? What I say is going to happen. So, retribution will happen. So we can rest in that truth. There are many things that we do not like that's taking place in our world. And some of it affects us, quite closely. Understand, God will deal with it. He's going to deal with it. Retribution will happen. Number 2, retribution is on God's time. It's on God's time. God says to Habakkuk, though it linger, wait for it. It's going to happen on his time. Now we, as a people, we cry out to God and say, hey, enough. Drop the boom, okay? Let them have it. That's what we want. We want it today. They're not going to get away with this. God, let them have it. Now, to paraphrase what God is saying this to us. Okay? God says to all of us, be patient. I will judge when I am ready. I got this. Let me be God. Okay? So retribution is on God's time. Number one, retribution will happen. Number two, it's based on God's time. And here's the third lesson regarding God's retribution. God's retribution will be on time. Okay? It will be on time. Verse 3, look at it, it says, though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. It will not delay. So when God thinks that the time is right, the hatchet will drop. Okay? It's going to happen. So what we learn here regarding that question, God, will these people get away with it? Well, of course, the answer is no. And God says, I'm going to deal with them, but I'm going to deal with it. First of all, know that it's going to happen. I will deal with it. Second of all, it's going to be on my time, okay? And when I do deal with it, it's going to be at the right time. Right time. So here's the summary. God's justice, his retribution, his judgment, or his vengeance, if you want, it will happen. People do not get away with it scot-free. It will happen. It will happen on God's time, and it will happen at the right time. At the right time. So that's what we learn about God's retribution, how he's going to bring judgment. What can we take away from Habakkuk this morning for our lives here in the 2021, okay? 2021, I think I got it right, didn't I? So we're living in troubled times, right? Well, here are 4 behaviors to live as you wait for God to balance the scales of justice. So here's how we respond. Number 1, I believe we need to live obediently. That's our response. We live obediently. And I draw that from verse 2 of Habakkuk. Remember, Habakkuk, the prophet, he's complaining to God. First of all, he doesn't like the fact that Israel is totally corrupt and polluted and nothing is happening to them. And God says, well, something's going to happen to them, and I'm going to use the Babylonians. And of course, that just floors Habakkuk. You're going to use that evil, wicked nation? I can't believe it, God. I can't believe it. God says, I am. And here's what I want you to do, Habakkuk. I want you to write down this revelation, and I want you to share it. So, in the midst of Habakkuk's complaint, when he's feeling that God is not doing things according to his time schedule, he's not doing it the way he thinks it should be done, God says to him, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write this down. So there's a principle of obedience. We don't like what God is doing. He's not operating according to our timetable. We think he should have dealt with it years ago, whatever it may be. Regardless of our feelings and emotions, we have to live obediently. That's what he wants of us. That's what he's asked of us. Be obedient. Be obedient. Here's the lesson number 2 for our troubled times. We are to live by faith, and that comes from verse 4. He speaks of the Babylonians there, who are very arrogant and puffed up. But he says, here's the opposite. My people, the righteous, they live by faith. That's in verse 4 there. So a lesson for us is that we need to live by faith. And living by faith is manifested in many ways. One such way is revealed in behavior number 3. And here we go to the third thing, the third lesson for us. Leave matters in God's hands. That's what we need to do. We need to leave matters in God's hands. And this is coming from Romans chapter 12, verse 19. It says this, do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge. I will repay,' says the Lord." So really here in that third lesson, that third behavior that we are to practice during this time, and that third behavior is leave the matters into God's hand. Let Him deal with it, okay? When we do that, we're practicing the first two lessons. When we let God be the judge and deal with what is wrong and not exercise vengeance, what we're doing is, one, we're living obediently because what? What did God just tell us in Romans chapter 12 there? Let vengeance be mine, He says. Okay, so we're being obedient. And second of all, we are living by faith. In other words, God, you told me, okay, I'm not supposed to really concern myself with this. I'm supposed to let you be God. Okay, I'm going to do that. Once we come to that conclusion, what we're doing is we've stepped into the realm of faith and we're saying, okay, God, I'm going to trust you and let you be God and let you do it. So you've exercised obedience and you've exercised faith as you leave the deception, all that stuff that creates that emotional need for vengeance. You've left that in God's hands. And He will take care of it. And just a quick side note, of verse 19 there, he says, "But leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge.'" And then it says, "I will repay." I will repay. So Habakkuk is asking, okay, God, you're going to use these Babylonians, this wicked nation. Okay, do that. But I want to know, God, will the Babylonians get away with this? Will they go scot-free? What does Romans chapter 12 tell us? He says, "Leave vengeance to me. I will repay." Does evil and injustice go unscathed? No, nothing happens to it? The answer is no. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So we've talked about leave matters into God's hands. That was the third lesson. Here's the fourth lesson, and I draw this lesson from the last verse of Habakkuk chapter 2. We are to worship our God in this time. Verse 20, "But the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before Him." What's that saying to us? It's saying to us, God is in control. Justice will prevail. You're on the winning team. You're on the winning team. And so when we have those truths in mind of His control, that justice will prevail, that we will win, our natural inclination then should be able to breathe, shouldn't be so frustrated, and we can focus on God and just say, hey, you are a good God. It's going to work out. It's going to work out. And that's part of worship, just recognizing who He is. It's all going to work out. He's in control. You are on the winning team. You're on the winning team. Well, that brings us to the end of Habakkuk chapter 2, as well as this morning's message. Let me, at this time, just bring some words of blessing to you. And so I want to invite you to stand as we close out our time together. When your difficulty is challenging and your frustration is great, wait. God is in control, and His work is amazing. As you wait, you will desire to be a doer. You'll say, I need to fix this. God understands. But His encouragement to you is this: walk by faith. For the righteous, they live by faith. Amen. You may be seated.